Geiger Polska, Jai Operacyjna Polska Taka de Medenkio, K i Cyrilo, Ifisia, Sadinkasia Napien, Zylosian Kaiskoi, Napierkelia, Ongona Azila Astruka Astika. Poluskimia, Kazade, Nikoloskio, Mountain Industria, Pol Telievufwa, Dadaskadel, Siva Bomi. V. Daishelia, Sliva Bomi. V. Napaliengia, Boile Tafikikia. Obziriatskin Sakia, Imenzia. Vivastoi. I Kenyania. Oi Tusilia. Yenien Ketrov le Brateria. Offensiva. Lashira, Zal Kalvova. Ivia Sel. Ikea Tesla. Orblio Gestrova. Vituslo. Ipoka Sterioko. Piriasasia, Onye, Zabrosha, or Tom, Seriesa, Li, On, Diverskio, Transhisiava, I, Bateriko, Penetratinkioka, Shelievka, V, Kojiut, Sidla, Stomi, Poshio, Taikov, Zev, Cybursio, Kia, Yasiel, by Robota, Kanyosha, Shashenki, V, Mechaniskium, Teske, Wojna, Stella, Absolutino, Schlusseno, Pushut, Aitut Ludio, Podruskiriot, Sailuskio, Rabatut, Biz, Valensticia, Ili, Zavestesta. Under the terms of the Chantilly Agreement of December 1915, Russia, France, Britain, and now Italy committed to a simultaneous attack against the Central Powers in the summer of 1916. Russia felt obligated to lend troops to fight in France and Salonika against Greeks' own wishes, and to attack on the eastern fronts in hopes of obtaining munitions from Britain and France. The Russians also initiated the disastrous Lake Narko offensive in the Balloon area, during which the Germans suffered only one-fifth as many casualties as the Russians. This offensive took place at the French request in hopes that the Germans would transfer more units to the east after their attack at Verdun. General Alexei Brusilov presented a plan to the Stavka, the Russian High Command, posing for a massive offensive by his southwestern front against the Austro-Hungarian forces in Galicia. Brusilov's plan aimed to take some of the pressure off of the French and the British armies in France, and the Italian army at the Azondo front, and if possible, even knock Austro-Hungary out of the war itself. As the Austro-Hungarian army was heavily engaged with the Italian army, the Russian army enjoyed a significant numerical advantage on the Galician front. General Alexei Evan, commander of the Russian Western Army Group, favored a defensive strategy in approach to Brusilov's offensive. Tsar Nicholas II took personal command of the army in September 1915. Everett was a strong supporter of Nicholas and the Romanov dynasty, but the Tsar approved Brusilov's plan. The objectives were to be the city of Korolev and Liev, which had been recovered by the Central Powers in the previous year in the Garlo-Tarnov offensive. Although the Stavka had approved for the Brusilov offensive, his requests for supporting offensive by neighboring fronts were denied. Mounting pressure by the Western Allies caused the Russians to hurry their preparations. Brusilov amassed 4 armies totaling 40 infantry divisions and 50 cavalry divisions. He faced 39 Austrian infantry divisions and 10 cavalry divisions, formed by a row of 3 defensive lines, although later German reinforcements were brought up to shore up the lines. Brusilov, knowing that he would not receive significant reinforcements, moved his reserves up to the front line. He used them to dig entrenchments about 300 to 90 meters along the front line. This provided shelter for the troops and hindered observation by the Austro-Hungarian Air Force. The Russians secretly sapped trenches and in some places tunneled within 91 meters of the Austro-Hungarian lines, and at some points as close as 69 meters, which was 75 yards. Brusilov prepared for a surprise assault along the 480-kilometer, which was 300-mile front. The Stavka urged Brusilov to shorten his attacking front considerably, to allow for a heavier concentration of Russian troops, but Brusilov insisted on his plan, and the Stavka relented. On June 4, 1916, the Russians opened the offensive with a massive, accurate but brief artillery barrage against the Austro-Hungarian lines, with the key factor of its effective bombardment being brief, accurate, deadly, and of course, short. This was in contrast to the customary, protracted bombardments that would give the enemy time to bring up reserves and evacuate the forward trenches. While damaging the battlefield so badly, it was hard for the attackers to advance. The initial attack was successful and the Austro-Hungarian lines were broken, enabling 3 of Brusilov's 4 armies to advance to the wide front at the Battle of Kushkanakiaka. The success of the breakthrough was helped in large part by Brusilov's innovations. to attack the weak points of the Austro-Hungarian lines to effect a breakthrough, in which the main Russian army could then exploit. Brusilov's tactic innovations also helped the Germans' infiltration tactics that would be later used on the Western Front. On June the 8th, forces of the Southwestern Front took the Battle of Lutsk. The Austro-Hungarian commander, Archduke Joseph Ferdinand, barely escaped to the city before the Russians entered. By now, the Austrians were in full retreat and the Russians had taken over 200,000 Austro-Hungarian prisoners. Brusilov's forces were becoming overextended as he made it clear that any further success of the operation depended on Everett launching his part of the offensive. Everett, however, continued to delay, which gave the German High Command time to send reinforcements to the Eastern Front. In a meeting the same day Lutz had fell, German Chief of Staff Erich von Falkenhayn persuaded his Austrian counterpart, Franz Conrad von Hotzendorf, to pull troops away from the Italian front to counter the Russian attacks in Galicia. Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg, Germany's commander in the east of the Oberkommandos Ost, was again able to capitalize on the good railroads to bring German reinforcements to the front. Finally, on the 18th of June, a weak and poorly prepared offensive commenced on the Evans. On the 24th of July, Alexander von Linsingen counter-attacked the Russians in the south of Korolev and temporarily stopped the advances in the west. On the 28th of July, Brusilov resumed his own offensive, and although his armies were in short supply, he reached the Carpathian Mountains on the 20th of September. The Russian High Command started transferring troops from Everett's front to reinforce Brusilov, a transfer Brusilov strongly opposed because more troops would only serve to clutter his front. The Brusilov operation achieved its original goal of forcing Germany to halt its attacks on Verdun, and the transfer of considerable forces to the east. It also broke the back of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, who suffered the majority of the casualties. Afterwards, the Austro-Hungarian army increasingly had to rely on the support of the German army for military success. On the other hand, the German army did not suffer as many casualties as the Austrians and the Russian army, and it also retained most of its offensive power afterwards. This was the offensive that changed the war as we know it, for in the early successes of the offensive, this convinced Romania to enter the war on the side of the Entente. Though this would turn out to be a bad decision since it led for the failure of the 1916 campaign and obviously the occupation of Romania, it still covered the Russian southwest flank. The Russian casualties for this battle are varying, but it is believed to be 500,000 to roughly 1 million. And the Austro-Hungarian and Germans, well, the Austrians had 600,000 lost and the Germans had 3,550 lost, which totaled to be nearly 1 million casualties as well for the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans, which brings the Brusilov to 2 million, which 1 million for both sides, which makes this the most lethal offensive in world history. The Brusilov was the high point of the Russian effort during World War I, and it was the manifestation of good leadership, planning, and a part of the Imperial Russian Army coupled with great skills of the lower ranks. The Brusilov offensive, commanded by Brusilov himself, went very well, but the overall campaign, for which Brusilov took part in, was only supposed to be a distraction. Because of the Everett's failures, it became a tremendous cost to the Imperial Army, and after this offensive, they would no longer be able to launch an offensive like this on the same scale again. The operation had also marked the considerable improvement for the quality of Russian tactics. Brusilov knew small specialized units to attack weak points in the Austro-Hungarian trench lines and blow holes for the rest of the army to advance into. This was a remarkable departure from all human wave tactics that decimated and dominated the strategy of major armies in 1914, even up to 1917. Everett, however, used conventional tactics which proved costly and indecisive, thereby costing Russia its chance at victory in 1916. The irony was that other Russian commanders did not realize the potential of these tactics that Brusilov had devised himself. Similar tactics were now being used by the French, German, and British on the Western Front, even though they had to be used on a different scale because of the static trench warfare. Similar tactics were separately chosen by the French, German, and British. Likewise, the British had the Canadian forces, the French had the chasseurs and the trench raiders, and of course the Germans had the famous and infamous stormtrooping tactics. And these armies would use all three of these units from 1916 onwards, especially for the Germans in their last offensive in the 1918 Kaiserslautern Spring Offensive. Breakthrough tactics. They would play a large part in the early German Blitzkrieg offensives, and later in the attacks of the Soviet Union, and of course on the Western Allied front. And it would evolve modern warfare, and would be used with modern armored warfare, and would change the shape of battlefield on the battlefield of 1916, on the battlefield of Galicia in 1916. Thank you for watching. It's a mess, but it will be done properly. And I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something. This is the magnum opus, and this is basically the end of the series. But I've still got 2 videos for y'all. I got Poland, I got the Women's Battalion of Death, which will be done on Saturday. Yeah, because this will go up tomorrow. The last 2 will be on Saturday, and of course Tannenberg will be on Sunday. And from Monday on, we will do the British, because Britain entering the war is kind of, like the French and the Russians, but they also have a couple of motives, but nothing too serious, but probably like 5 minutes. But hope you learned something. Dash Vidania. I gotta record a quote, but don't worry, I'll get that done. Alright, you learned something, and be good. Dash Vidania.